Hey, David, it is great to see you, man. How are you?
Doing well. Great to see you too, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, we are celebrating now 30 years since Safe States, now Safe States. And you know what? I thought our name was great when we started, but this Safe States captures it, man. It is terrific. And 30 years ago, the State and Territorial Injury Prevention Directors Association was birthed. And shortly thereafter, as epidemiologists, we were kind of thinking about the magnitude of the injury and violence problem. But you chaired our first injury surveillance work group. And as I'm thinking about that, I just thought it'd be great to have you think back with me about that, about how you led us as epidemiologists across the nation and the thinking that went into that. And let's just visit about that for a little bit.
Great, great. Yeah, it is remarkable. 30 years. It's a great achievement. And as you mentioned, since 2001, Safe States has convened multidisciplinary group of experts to make recommendations on how to improve injury surveillance in the country.
Yeah.
And this initiative was known as the Injury Surveillance Work Groups.
Okay.
And these groups were comprised of representatives from different organizations from around the nation that did injury research, that did injury surveillance, and the whole idea of these injury surveillance work groups were to provide recommendations on how to improve surveillance, analysis, and reporting. And the first one, which focused in on hospital discharge data, that was important because state health departments rely on injury surveillance to implement their injury prevention policies and programs. And states do have do have death data, but hospital discharge data provided more insights in terms of non-fatal injuries and hospital discharges. So Safe State saw a need to convene a multidisciplinary group of experts from CDC Injury Center, National Center for Health Statistics, CSTE, as well as the Injury Research Centers to come together and let's talk about the strengths and limitations of discharge data and see if we could come to some consensus recommendations on how to use that data set for injury surveillance in the states. So it was about this first group was about 15 members from these diverse groups. We met often, had some great discussions on what were the strengths of the discharge data as well as its limitations. And the report, which is on the Safe States website, encourage people to look at that. It talked about the first step, obviously, is to try to assess the quality of the discharge data before you would dive into deeper in terms of the analysis. So it was really a great initial effort to look at hospital discharge data, and I think that there has been over the last 20 years, there's been 10 different ISWs that have focused on different injury surveillance issues such as falls, poisoning surveillance, pedestrian injury surveillance, and the most current one, which is really fascinating, is on recreational boat occupant injury surveillance. So Safe States has really provided a pivotal role to convene these groups to talk about ways to improve injury surveillance. And I know that you've had a lot of work, you've done a lot of work on injury surveillance. And could you sort of talk about how state programs can use injury surveillance and some of the challenges that they might have with that?
Yeah, no, Dave, thank you so much. And what a great synopsis. And I think, as I think back to that first ISW, one of the key things it did was help form this cohesive framework for the nation. because some of the states were starting to look. We started with mortality data. That's what we had, but we didn't really have an organized approach to looking at the morbidity data, the non-fatal injury data.
Mhm.
And so we were starting to do that in several of the states, but what you did in this with this work group was bring together these consensus recommendations as you described them that served, as you'll recall, they were incorporated right into some of the grant requirements in subsequent years after that. States needed to either comply with or work towards meeting that
Mhm.
framework, and that let us compare data across states.
Mhm.
And it was so important. I mean, as you know, as epidemiologists, we we think about case definitions and the biases, right, that
Right.
affect case definitions, what goes in, what stays out, and your work was really important for that. And so you're exactly right. We used that to help guide and improve and evaluate our hospital discharge data within the state. And that let us build, we think, effective and kind of on point programs for prevention. It also let us help suggest some policy approaches that needed to change in Minnesota. So we've used the other ISW reports since then as well, but yours was yours. I mean, yours was tremendous and was that foundation. I mean, I think the other thing that we've brought to mind is that not everything that can be counted necessarily should be counted.
Right.
And you helped help us think through that, and with bringing together that multidisciplinary group to participate in that, it really helped talk through. And I think it engendered the strong respect between the injury centers and state epidemiologists working at the state level. It formed some key partnerships that
Mhm.
have just really blossomed in the interim. So I really like that.
And
I think,
let me add to your great point about the partnership, because with these ISWs, um, it brought together a lot of different people, representatives from a lot of different agencies. And for me, and I know for perhaps the other members, we were able to get out of our silos and personally meet these other individuals from these different agencies and perspectives and expertise, and talk about, our perspectives as it relates to the strengths and limitations of these different, injury surveillance issues. And that created additional mutual respect, and learned a great deal from my colleagues there. So as these other ISWs are, have been formed and have produced these similar reports, I'm sure that they had the same type of experience as well.
yeah, that's a point well made. I think that what we've tried to do as epidemiologists, David, between Texas and Minnesota and our surrounding states in the nation is to try to help our colleagues tell the story,
Mm-hmm.
the impact of injury and violence, and having accurate and timely data has helped us to do that. And again, your leadership in this has just been really important. So maybe you've mentioned the most recent ISW report, and that I think ties in with some of the work that you're doing now in Texas and maybe beyond in the nation on uh, some of the boating or water safety projects.
Well, one of the great things about Safe States is being able to be a convener
Yeah.
and bringing members together that have shared interest on different injury issues. And one of the things that Safe States formed a decade or so ago was a disaster epidemiology special interest group.
Yes.
Back in 2004, there was that terrible earthquake and tsunami in Asia, and Safe States, along with the injury research centers and the injury section of APHA, convened a international and global teleconference to talk about, with WHO and CDC, what were the injury responses to that terrible disaster. And from that, the Safe States members passed a disaster epidemiology resolution
That's
that
right.
encouraged each state and territory to establish or maintain expertise in disaster epidemiology. And Safe State members have a lot of states have a lot of experience in disaster epidemiology. So this group was formed. Had representatives from Oklahoma, North Carolina, Florida, many other states that had extensive experience with responding to disasters. They came together, and this group prepared a document that listed out potential injury responses to hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, heat, and winter storms. And it really provides an illustration about the expertise that Safe State members have coming together on special interests, and then providing a document or recommendations that would elevate the rest of the states and territories on injury response. And injury issues are always evolving. Syndromic surveillance now is very prevalent in across the country, and I know many injury epidemiologists are looking at how do we leverage that type of real-time data to improve our understanding and, as you said quite well, the storytelling about injuries as a public health problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, and then I think, it was in addition to natural disasters, because it was, I think, that next year then that our colleagues in Oklahoma had the bombing, right? And so we had that disaster. So it's the approach, that epi approach has been used across for this array of disasters, and just really significant. I I think often in our role as epidemiologists of the quote, I think that you and I have shared before from St. Augustine, do I measure, oh my God, and know not what I measure? And kind of that dilemma and tension between the capacity to measure things, but to be able to use it, to translate it into action.
Right.
So I don't know, Dave, thanks a lot, man. This has just been so great to connect and to visit with you, and so proud of all you've done. And down the road, I may be joining you in Texas.
Great, great. Well, I had a great time chatting and reminiscing with you, Mark.
Thanks, David. Take care.